What is up, everybody, and welcome to another video. In today's video, I've got the Max Ace Peon, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this. Tap. That's right, tap, the big bad word in the Balisong community. What is tap and what isn't tap, and is tap bad? Well, here's the thing to know, right? I have heard stories from Squid Industries, from other makers I've worked with, machine-wise. I've heard stories. I've had firsthand experience now that we have the Vulp, where people have said, oh yeah, I got it, and it developed tap within like a day of me getting it, and now it's broken, and I need to return it. And that is a funny way of putting that, because here's the thing. Tap doesn't mean that your Balisong is broken. Tap isn't even that bad of a thing. All tap is a quick shorthand to determine how well tuned a Balisong is, okay? And I mean this like so seriously. A Balisong can have tap, but it's really not that big of a deal if it does. And there's a good reason why, okay? One thing that you'll notice the more that you actually get into the Balisong community and the more that you see higher level flippers is you'll start to notice that higher and higher level flippers often have Balisongs that have pretty bad tolerances for some reason. One of the ones that immediately comes to mind is Assflow or Assassin Flown, who literally flips his 47 without screws in the pivots. It has so much tap, it's hilarious. But it still flips incredibly good. The reason for this is the swing is completely unimpeded, and so the handles swing extremely freely and never get stuck with one another, and therefore it makes it an incredible flipper. The thing is, tap is just an aesthetic problem with the Balisong normally, right? Oh, wait. We're holding the phone. We're gonna start. We're holding the learning. There's an isopod. Come here, buddy. Come here. You get to be the star of the show today. We feature a bug on almost every Will Flips, so you get to be the star of the show today. His name is Jeffrey, and he is a normal Armadillidium isopod. And you can tell when they're Armadillidium because their shells are this sort of rounded, and they look like a little armadillo when they roll up. They can roll up perfectly into a ball like an armadillo. The other ones that you've probably seen before are kind of flat. Those are often called wood lice. You'll find them under rotting wood, whereas these guys are round and they turn into a ball. The flat ones are called Porticellio, while these ones are called Armadillidium. So now you've learned something about isopods in this video. Great job, little guy. Boop. Anyways, talking about tap again, tap is just, it's not as big of an issue as it's kind of been played out to be within the community. Instead, what tap is shorthand for how extremely well-tuned a Balisong is. Here's the thing, it is actually really, really difficult to get the tap out of a Balisong, and this Balisong is a great example to that, okay? This Balisong taps pretty badly, like you can hear a lot of tap. But the thing to know is that it is barely loose right now. If I take it and tighten it just the tiniest bit, okay? Just a little bit like that on both. Suddenly, it has perfect play and no tap. Now, why is that? Well, here's the thing to know, right? Inside of the pivots, you have a pivot system happening, which has in this one, it has a bushing and washers, and each of those parts need to be cut to fit the blade, and they need to fit it within a few thousandths of an inch, if not less than a thousandth of an inch. Like, it needs to be that accurate. It needs to be thinner than a human hair style accuracy, like really, really, really accurate, okay? It's hard to do. And the reason for this is because the smallest amount of a gap in the actual pivots gets amplified across the length of the handle. And so what you end up having, what you end up having happen is that tiny, tiny, tiny imperfection will get amplified all the way down here, and suddenly you have movement of up to like a centimeter in some cases if it's really, really bad. But usually it's as much as a millimeter or two. Now, a millimeter or two doesn't sound like a lot until you look at how some of these Balisongs actually go together. So if you notice here, the actual size of the hole where the blade goes into is almost the exact same size as the blade itself. There is very little wiggle room inside of there for the blade to fit into here without actually touching either side of the handles. Okay? The reason this is crazy is because that's why you have to have such incredibly tight tolerances to not have any tap whatsoever. Okay? It's that really, really, really slim area of difference that keeps tap from happening. And here's the thing to know. Even if tap does happen, it doesn't actually make the Balisong flip worse. And in some cases, Balisongs that have no tap actually flip worse than when they do have tap. And the reason for that is over-tightened pivots. In fact, over-tightened pivots are far worse than tap itself, okay? If your Balisong has or doesn't have tap, that doesn't make it a good or bad flipper. What that makes it is a slightly less tuned flipper. But that's not a bad thing. Here's another one that's a really interesting example, right? This is my Stitch Steel Alien, and right now it doesn't have any tap. But if I were to loosen it just slightly, it would start developing tap. And the reason for that, once again, is how incredibly close the blade comes to the handles. It literally, there is such a small area in there that is available as space. And so it needs to be so perfect, the sizing of all of the different parts, okay? So that's how tap works. Now, what is tap an indicator of? Well, many people say that tap is an indicator of blade rub. But I think people are kind of getting it confused what blade rub even is in their head. So let me loosen this Balisong again to give it some tap. All right, so just that little bit of looseness should probably be enough. Listen to that. Yeah, we're tapping again with just the tiniest bit of loosening. But it still feels really good to flip. Now, why is that? Well, tap and blade rub are two different things. What is blade rub? Well, people would say, oh, blade rub is when the blade rubs against the handles, right? And that is kind of true. Blade rub is the blade rubbing against the handles, and you can hear it right here. If I force the blade to touch the handle, right? You can hear that rubbing sound, okay? That's what blade rub is. However, even with tap, right? If I do this, you can't hear that rubbing sound when the blade is actually moving by itself. And that's because the blade is still pretty well centered. Even though it can touch the handles, it's not actually rubbing against them. The actual thing that blade rub is when you actually have your pivots fully tightened, the blade comes out at a slight angle, which causes it to rub against the handle. And so that is what causes it to stick. So if you have a knife that actually has blade rub, when you try to open it, the blade will stick inside of the handle because it's rubbing against it, even when tight. Okay? Blade rub is very bad because that means that the Balisong is going to stick together and not actually be very successful when you're trying to do stuff like aerials or even basic tricks. Whereas tap doesn't really actually affect the flippability of the Balisong by all that much. It's still a useful metric for giving a shorthand for like how well tuned a Balisong is, but just because a Balisong has tap does not mean that it's broken, and it really doesn't even mean that it's a bad Balisong. Many good Balisongs have tap. It's just kind of how knives work. It's such a incredibly precise thing that you're trying to accomplish here that a little bit of an adjustment will lead to tap. And here's the other thing. If you are complaining about your knife, having developed tap, but you don't have a Torx driver that's good quality, and you don't have a way of locking your pivots with thread locker, then why are you complaining about tap? And the other thing here is also, if you don't have lube, then yeah, your knife's gonna get tap. Even if you completely tune it perfectly, you need lube to keep tap from happening on most Balisongs. Here's the thing, right? Inside of this system, everything is so microscopically precise. Whoops. Everything is so microscopically precise that what you end up actually having is when the lube goes into the pivots of the Balisong, it will fill the microscopic holes in between everything with liquid, okay? And what that actually does is it creates a layer inside of there through capillary action that allows the Balisong to have even less tap than you were originally, thinking it would have. Watch this. I'm gonna add a little bit of lube here. This is super important. If you have a Balisong and don't have lube, but you complain about the fact that it has tap, it's probably because you don't have lube that it has tap. That's like how that works. The other thing is you need a good Torx driver. Here's the thing. You don't just go and buy a pet fish or a dog without, getting also dog food and a dog bowl or a fish tank and fish food, right? You need things to take care of the animal you buy. And similarly, you don't just buy a Balisong and not also buy a Torx driver and lube. These are things that are super important to taking care of and maintaining your Balisong in the long term. And so not having these items is actually extremely bad for the life of your knife. So that's the thing that I've kind of been thinking about lately, is I think there's too many people getting into the hobby uninformed and not realizing that, first of all, tap, while it is an issue, is not that bad of an issue. And then second of all, even when a Balisong does have tap, and even if you can't tune it out, it doesn't mean that it's broken. That's just kind of how these knives work sometimes. And then finally, you can't just get an item like this and expect it to be perfect forever without you having to do any work behind it. Balisongs are a hobby built upon the work of others, and so you need to have some kind of understanding of how to take apart and tune your Balisong, and also the tools that are needed to take care of your Balisong in the long run, okay? It's very, very important that you actually purchase the stuff that is required to take care of your Balisong. I can't believe this. I have to say this, but I do. Something that we heard from Lucas of Squid Industries was that sometimes they'll get like a return message request, or they'll get somebody sending in their Balisong saying, oh yeah, it's broken. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, what happened? Like, what's wrong with your knife? And they'll be like, oh, well, I bought a Nautilus, and I've had it for like 3 months, and now it started tapping, and I don't know what to do about it, so I'm going to send it back to get it fixed. And then Lucas is like, okay, well, do you have a screwdriver and some lube? And they're like, oh, no, I don't have a Torx driver or any lube. Then what are you doing? That was the most interesting story I had heard from Lucas in quite a while. It really put things into perspective for me, realizing that some people really don't, have a full grasp on what is needed to actually get into the hobby. And so that's why in the, upcoming Balisong 101 revamp video, I'm going to make it very clear and important that this hobby isn't about just buying the first Balisong you see, and instead is actually much more about learning to take care of the Balisong that you have. So yeah, that's kind of it for my rant today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about tap and why it's not the demon that the community kind of makes it out to be. And it's funny because even the people that talked about tap and kind of created the idea of it, NRB on his channel was one of the first people to really popularize the idea of tap. And even when he talked about it, he didn't necessarily talk about it like it was like the worst thing in the world, but he brought it up as just a quick metric to tell how tuned a Balisong is. And I think that's a perfectly fine metric for that. But it's not a metric of whether or not your Balisong is broken or even a good flipper. A Balisong that has tap has nothing to do with it whether or not it will actually flip good. Okay? The thing that is much more important is the amount of play, because something can have tap and only have like 0.5 millimeter of play. Watch this. When I give this knife tap again, so I'm gonna get it to where it starts to tap but doesn't have a whole lot of play. Okay? So that's a little bit of play. Okay, we're close. I need to go slightly looser, just the tiniest bit. This is also probably because I put the lube in it. As I said, lube does help fix tap. There we go. All right, I'm having tap, okay? This is tapping, but let's look at the play. That play is so small. That's about 1 millimeter, if not 1.5 millimeters okay? Like, it's a really small amount of play. This is a normal amount of play in many Balisongs. And yet, like, so if I bring in some of my other Balisongs, this one doesn't have any play. My boy from Machine Wise has about 0.5 millimeter of play, so it's not, you know, it's not the same, but like, it's still not nothing. And this one doesn't have any tap, but it has a little bit of play. Same thing with my Alien. My Alien has very little play right now, but it still has some, you know, it's not perfect. My Vulp, let's see here, still doesn't have any tap, but it's got almost the same play as the Max Ace knife, and the Max Ace knife is loose. And this one has more play, but no tap right now. And the reason for that is the reliefs inside of the handle are wider than the Max Ace one, so there's more space for the knife to fall in there without tapping against the handles. So the actual value of this one, I mean, this one's only 65 bucks, but you know, the fact that this one has more play than this one, but this one taps, doesn't mean that this is a better knife than this one. It just means that this has more play and this one doesn't, but this one has a smaller relief groove. And like, the smaller a relief groove doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad knife. As I said, it really just has to do with whether or not it catches when you're trying to perform tricks and stuff like that. And even with tap, this Balisong flips fantastically. So yeah, don't let the tap haters get you down. If you have a Balisong that has tap, don't feel bad about it. It's fine. Tap is great. It's fine to have tap. If it's when it starts to affect the flippability of your Balisong, when your Balisong starts sticking, or when you're chasing that no tap perfect tuning only to accidentally over tighten your pivots and make your Balisong flip worse, that's when tap is an issue, actually. So yeah, I know this has been a really long rant. I'm sorry about that. I'm really passionate about this issue, and I haven't talked about it at length before. And yeah, that's my opinion on tap. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you, and that's pretty much it for this one. Peace.